So, welcome back to the Mental Health Canvas with the Office of Intercultural Affairs on CFRU 93.3 FM. If you're joining us for the first time, this is a show to discuss mental health. It's to open the dialogue on mental health issues, especially for international students. Since the beginning of the semester, we've had a variety of guests come talk about a lot of issues relating to mental health. So, to date, we have been speaking in fairly general terms about mental health, but we've been skimming over a very important issue, the internal factors that can make or break our mental wellness. So today we will be discussing internal dialogue and spiritual worldview. And we have two quite qualified guests with us today from our university community. We have Rob and Marty. If you would want to tell us who you are and tell us something fun or great you did this summer.
Okay. I'm Rob Baldwin. I'm a counselor at Counseling Services here at the University of Guelph on the third floor of the University Center. I'm one of about 13 or 14 counselors at Counseling Services. And something fun and exciting I did this summer, spent some time on Lake Superior, North Shore,
nice.
Which is kind of my spiritual homeland. That's where I'm from originally.
Okay.
And I'm Marty Molengraaf, part of the Multi-Faith Resource Team. I've been on campus almost 2 years now and really enjoy the connections with the students here and with other staff as well. One of the fun things I did this summer, I actually got a tree stand, which, I dressed up all in my camouflaged outfit, with my hat and my coat and my all that kind of stuff, and go out sit in this tree stand armed with my camera.
To do what?
And to take pictures of wildlife.
Wow,
and so we got some
brilliant.
phenomenal pictures of a moose, actually.
Oh, that's
So yeah, it was pretty neat.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll have to show you those sometime. Yeah, pretty neat.
For those who don't know, I'm your host, GB. I work for the Office of Intercultural Affairs, student staff member, and I have been your host for this entire time. This summer, I really didn't do anything fascinating. I kind of just worked. Yeah, pretty much for the entire summer. Preparing for you international students. Well, thank you for being my guest today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on our topic. Our office, the Office of Intercultural Affairs, we deal with a lot of international students. So we get a variety of family backgrounds and cultures and religions, you name it. And it's amazing to see how the environment that we grew up in affects the way we see ourselves and the way we think about the world. So let's talk about internal dialogue. What can you tell me about it? What's internal dialogue?
So, from my perspective as a counselor, internal dialogue is something that we talk to students about all the time because it's so important. Internal dialogue is essentially how we talk to ourselves in our head, basically our thoughts. And the nature of the way we talk to ourselves, our internal dialogue, or we often call it self-talk, has a lot to do with our mood,
Right.
i.e. our mental health. It's not the only factor that impacts mental health, but it's an important one.
Very important, yeah.
So the quality and the nature of that internal dialogue, that self-talk, whether we're good to ourselves, whether we're really hard on ourselves, for instance, makes a big difference to things like happiness, contentment, depression, anxiety, stress,
Right.
which are huge issues for students. Students from anywhere. Doesn't matter where you're from, whether you're from Canada or whether you're an international student. We all have this internal running dialogue going, and it's different for each one of us. And the quality of that, the nature of that is very important to our mental health.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, from my perspective, internal dialogue is a human experience. As Rob said, it's something that connects us all in that sense. We all know what we're talking about when we say, oh, we talk to ourselves. And sometimes it's a very positive thing. Other times it's a very negative thing. And when it's a negative thing, it's hard to get off. It's hard to get off that bandwagon. It seems that we tend to go in circles in that negative self-talk. And from my perspective as a spiritual advisor, much of that negative self-talk is based on a worldview that we have adopted or perhaps that has been given to us. And a lot of that worldview has to do with a spiritual worldview. And so I'm hoping that we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about that as well.
Absolutely. I think is a very fascinating concept because when it comes to mental health, we are often very focused on the external factors that could affect us negatively. And, speaking as an international student, issues like culture shock, discrimination, financial problems, even the weather, those kinds of things can easily cause us to have these negative thoughts and think bad about our situation. We start saying, oh, I hate my life. I don't know why this is happening to me. All these thoughts going through our heads, and we may not even be aware that these internal thoughts are affecting us negatively. So then, how can the way we think about ourselves affect our mental health? What's the connection there?
Well, getting back to sort of the nature of the self-talk, essentially we develop basic beliefs as we're growing up, and we learn them. This is something that we learn.
Of course.
Our internal dialogue, the way we talk to ourselves and the way we think of ourselves in the world is something we learn as we grow up in our environment. And if we learn positive beliefs, constructive beliefs, realistic beliefs, we tend to have more realistic thoughts and expectations of ourselves, and our moods tend to be more balanced.
Right.
If we develop, growing up in our environment, for whatever reason, negative, critical views of ourselves, like I'm not a good person, I'm essentially, there's something wrong with me, and I'm just not, a capable person, I'm going to have trouble, then we tend to move towards that. We move towards what we keep repeating in our head. Our brain believes what we tell it over and over and over. So if we tell ourselves, fundamentally my belief is I'm a good person and I'm a capable person, and I got lots of growing to do, but I'm good and capable, then we'll move towards that. Yeah. And it affects our self-esteem, it affects our self-concept, it affects how we think we're doing in relationships, it affects what we think we can accomplish. So our belief systems develop, and that influences in a huge way, it directs our internal dialogue. These things can be changed, but often we don't even know they're running. Exactly. It's like an operating system in a computer running in the background, like Windows, right? But very often when young adults come to the university, they leave home from wherever home is, they often find that some of the old belief systems start running them into trouble. And we often see students coming into counseling services when they're running into trouble, obviously. And sometimes what we have to do is help them to understand what are your beliefs that you're maybe running up against. And like you say, often we're not very aware of them even, but they're running in the background, and all the information that's coming into us is running through it like an operating system.
So I guess your job is to bring it to the surface.
Exactly. We need to help the students become more aware of what's going on in there, in those background belief systems and internal dialogue that may be generating you some difficulty.
And from my perspective, GP, those background belief systems or those core beliefs, I think come from a variety of different. They may come from the relationships that you have with your parents and the way that your parents have brought you up. But also, I think a lot of them come from our understanding of who we are. We always ask these questions like, who are we, and what is life about, and is there a God, and what's my purpose? And so we're heading into the realm of a kind of a spiritual worldview. And if our spiritual worldview is a negative one, and if it's based on those very, very difficult concepts of fear and guilt, then that self-talk becomes characteristic of that fear and guilt. And so we project that fear and guilt towards ourselves and make ourselves feel very small, very, quote-unquote, to use a theological word, very sinful, which is unfortunate because in many of the world religions, there is the understanding that God, whatever we call God, as being the creator, in many of the traditions, there is the sense in which God recognizes the creation as good, but we kind of interpret that or reinterpret that, that God is a demanding God or a very vengeful God, and if we don't do the right things, then God is going to punish us, and so all of this fear and all of this guilt becomes part and part of who we identify ourselves to be, and that's a very negative self-definition that causes a lot of very difficult self-talk.
You've made a lot of really important points. University students, I think, nowadays are at a very unique time because they're under a lot of pressure, not just to succeed, but to make the world a better place. And because of these stressors, we often are overly critical of ourselves. Being an international student myself, I can relate to your point about being overly critical because I often don't take time to acknowledge the good things I've done, reward myself for the small victories, and I focus so much on the failures. Yes. But it's important to remind ourselves all the time to be thankful in our lives for those things that we are happy for, to ground our self-talk in the now. here and now. And there's this recent movement on campus that, I think is getting a lot of momentum. And I want to know why. It's called Ubuntu. So, Marty, can you share with us a little bit about what Ubuntu is?
Ubuntu is it's very exciting. It actually comes to us from South Africa, from the Zulu people of South Africa. And I think probably the most recent experience for most people about Ubuntu comes from the movie Avatar. And James Cameron actually used some of the dialogue for the people who were the residents of, I can't remember what that planet was, the Na'vi people. And some of the dialogue, when they greeted each other, were the words, I see you. Right. And then the response was, I am here. So first of all, I see you as a fellow human being. And then I am here. I'm not way off somewhere else, but I am here. I am present. And in that dialogue, we understand this worldview, this wonderful, embracing worldview of Ubuntu, recognizing the humanness in each other and recognizing the connection that we have to each other. Right. And in that sense, those who have a spiritual bent, also the connection to all of life, to all of creation, and to God as well. And it's a very powerful worldview that recognizes that we're not individuals first and foremost, but that we are people in relationship. And as people in relationship, we have value to each other, and we have value to the Creator because the Creator is the one who created us.
Absolutely.
So Ubuntu is this very affirming, celebrative understanding of who we are.
Okay, thanks, Marty. It sounds really, really amazing. I think from what you said, I'm getting that it's all about connectedness and community and seeing yourself in others. And that seems to be the pillar of a lot of spiritual paths and faiths. And it's a little quite unfortunate that there seems to be a lot of intolerance for people who are different or share different views in the world today. And such intolerance often stems from a seed that's been planted in your mind about who God is and what it means to be a good person. And as humans, we make decisions based on these views, right? And that vision is often a reflection of our concept of a deity or God. So I know you already touched on spiritual worldview, but now is your chance to expand a little bit more on how it affects mental health and this concept of internal dialogue.
I'd like to say that we very often have students talking about when they come in for counseling. That's one of the things that they like to talk about when they're comfortable enough, is their spiritual worldview or lack of spiritual worldview. And one of the things that I think is very important personally to talk to them about is how does their particular worldview, spiritual worldview, impact how they see themselves and how they see the world. Right. Is this a friendly universe or is it not? and are they alone or are they not? And how does that impact their well-being and their sense of being in relationship, being connected to something that's bigger than themselves, whether it's nature or a God or creator of some sort? It's hugely important. And I think that sometimes students are surprised when we talk about that they start to realize how big an issue that is. And I have many students talk to me about having become disappointed and discouraged and disenfranchised from whatever faith tradition they might have been raised in. And the majority of students here in Guelph that we talk to are are often of a Christian background or one of the other major faith traditions. And many times they become disenfranchised, very disappointed with the doctrine that they grew up with. And unfortunately, often they've thrown out the baby with the bathwater when they've decided not to continue that faith tradition and have no sense of spirituality. So one of the things I really like about Marty's Ubuntu movement, I want to call it a movement that's happening, is that it really helps such students get the baby back, right? So it's the sense of spiritual, whatever that might be for you, right? Without necessarily having to adopt all the institutional doctrine again that frustrated them in the first place. And that is hugely important, I believe, to our mental health for all the reasons that we're talking about.
Absolutely, Rob. And just to add to that, I think part of the struggle in terms of mental health is that we live in such a individualistic world that everything is a competition, you know, and you can see that all the way from sibling rivalry to, you know, does mom love me as much as dad loves me, or all those kinds of things, you know, and students, I think, deal with that. And so when it comes to senses of spirituality, if their worldview or if their faith is one that is deemed to be in competition with another faith, i.e. my faith is better than your faith, you know, I'm a Christian, therefore that's better than someone who is a Muslim, or I am a Muslim, so that's better than someone who is of the Jewish background, and whatever it may be. When our worldviews are in competition with each other, it makes for the winners and the losers, so to speak, at least in our own mind. And so that creates a bit of dissension, actually a lot of pain in relationships. And so one of the beautiful things about Ubuntu is that rather than seeing differences as something that creates the other, now, Ubuntu is recognizing the essence of the humanity in each of us. And therefore, because we are all human, we have different perspectives, but those perspectives can help us as opposed to hinder us. Those perspectives are something that we can celebrate
and learn from
to become more human. So someone who is a Christian can become a stronger Christian when recognizing and affirming and celebrating the faith of someone who is Muslim, or someone who is Zoroastrian, or someone who is Hindu, or someone who is Buddhist, because we can learn from each other. The essence of Ubuntu is that.
I think it's really important for every one of us to evaluate our spiritual worldview. Think about why we believe the things we believe and what's really good about it, or what can be potentially harmful.
Absolutely. It comes back to our discussion earlier about our essential belief systems, right?
Absolutely.
And how that impacts us and our well-being and our mental health.
And it's particularly important when we find ourselves in situations when the way we view ourselves or others could impact them negatively, you know, when it could lead to intolerance. You might not be aware how harmful it could be to the other person, but that's because you haven't taken time out to evaluate yourself.
And ultimately, just to jump in there, how harmful it is to self. Right? Because when you are in competition with others, then there's also introduces the concept, well, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I've got it all screwed up, and maybe I am a person who is a problem. And all that internal self-talk becomes very, very negative and very, very difficult.
And as you've both hinted on, it's something that can affect our mental well-being.
Absolutely.
Or does affect our mental well-being.
Hugely.
So it's a good time it's good to spend some time reflecting on ourselves to figure out whether we're on the right track in terms of our internal dialogue, a spiritual worldview. And it's perfect that we have two specialists, quote unquote, here with us who can help with that. So I want to ask you, what steps can we take to move from a negative to positive self-talk or spiritual worldview, and what resources are available to students on campus to explore?
Well, I think that a primary and key step is to, one way or another, to start becoming more aware of how it is that we talk to ourselves and what the belief systems are beneath that are generating that internal dialogue. Like you said earlier, often we're just not aware. It's so familiar that we don't even notice it anymore.
Almost becomes subliminal.
It's like, that's why I like the analogy of the operating system in the computer, the Windows running in the background. We don't often see it, but it's always there, and it's always, all the information coming into us, all our senses are being interpreted constantly through this operating system, or this set of beliefs. So we need to become aware of, how is it that I talk to myself? What is it that I say to myself? And we can do that simply by kind of imagining that we're observing our own thoughts. Kind of a funny idea, but it's like imagining a little Rob kind of observing, what is it that you're saying to yourself down there, you know? And not judgmentally. It's just observation. So it's not about beating ourselves up even more.
Not to beat yourself up.
Exactly. It's, what is it that's going on in your thoughts? And what are the beliefs under that? And are those serving me well? What's the impact of that on how I feel, on my mood? If I'm prone to anxiety or depression, for instance, or if I've been through really difficult things in my life, which unfortunately many people have, how do those belief systems impact how I feel day to day, my mood? It's enormously important to things like depression, anxiety, happiness, contentment. I I can't emphasize enough how important it is. So that self-awareness is key.
Yeah.
And certainly in terms of resources on campus, there are a lot of resources on campus for students to work on this sort of thing. Of course, there's counseling services, which is available only to students.
Yep.
And students can come in and work with a counselor or in one of our many groups on these sorts of things. We have groups that help people with this specifically around anxiety and depression and many things. There are also workshops that happen on campus, sponsored not only by Counseling Services, but the Learning Commons and Kathy Summers programs on campus that teach skills about decreasing and managing stress and anxiety, learning relaxation, better sleep program. Kathy offers another one of those. Meditation, mindfulness meditation is very, very helpful at learning to calm our internal dialogue.
I need to get myself into all these sessions.
Yeah. Meditation, mindfulness meditation, Counseling Services has one of our counselors, Sue Gadbois, offers training sessions and classes on those basic skills, which are very, very helpful. It's being used a lot in counseling, and of course it's very ancient practice. But basically it's about bringing our thoughts back to the present moment rather than spinning them off into the future, making up scary scenarios that probably will never happen, or back into the past, ruminating over bad things that happened
that you can't change.
That you can't change. So there are lots of resources available for students.
And from an Ubuntu perspective, I think the first thing to recognize is that, because I'm feeling and experiencing all this negative talk, I'm not alone, because I'm human and the next person beside me is human, regardless of race, culture, creed, regardless of color of skin. I'm human like the other person is human. And so there's a sense of comfort knowing that I'm not alone, right? That the other person is experiencing those things as well. And so Ubuntu calls on us to recognize that sense of joy of discovery in diversity.
Right.
And when we can connect with other people, rather than thinking they are different, we recognize our sameness, therefore safety in talking to other people about the same things that we're experiencing. And Ubuntu gives us that opportunity to do that. So people who are struggling with a lot of negative self-talk, I'd encourage them to get involved in activities, workshops, programs around diversity. Because as we learn about each other, we learn more about ourselves and recognize that we are not alone, that we're not in this thing called being human by ourselves, but that we are deeply connected to each other. And that deep connection shows an awful lot of support, care, love, compassion.
So where can students go to find this deep connection? Where does Ubuntu meet?
Ubuntu meets at the corner of compassion and love and care and acceptance and diversity. Ubuntu does work with a variety of other groups on campus doing some collaborative events. But we do meet on Wednesdays at 11:30, every Wednesdays at 11:30, and we have some great food together, because food is one of those things that, it just breaks down those barriers, right? Brings people together. So Wednesdays at 11:30. But Ubuntu is not the only group on campus that works with diversity. Lots of things in terms of student life celebrate that sense of diversity. Lots of the programs at Residence Life celebrate that sense of diversity. The HREO office, Human Rights and Equity office here on campus. And so it's important to plug in to that those opportunities to experience diversity. And when you do that, you begin to create a stronger sense of being thankful as human beings, because we see all of this wonderful diversity around us. And being thankful is one of the, they say that Thanksgiving gratitude is the doorway to Ubuntu. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because as we're thankful for the experiences that we have and for the relationships that we have this greater connection with each other, and frankly a greater connection with the Creator or God, however we might define that.
Yeah. GBU mentioned that right at the beginning of the program about the importance of gratitude. Yeah. It's that attitude of gratitude, as they say, is so important.
So much.
And often a very important balancing point to keep things in perspective for those who are learning to overcome the negative internal dialogue and shift that, is adopting that, like Marty says, that sense of gratitude and thankfulness. Because no matter how hard things are at school or in what's going on in your life, we can always, if we look, find things that we can be grateful for, like the clothes on our back and the food that we get to eat and the roof over our head. Those may seem like little things, but they're important things. And not everybody in the world has those things.
Right.
We're very fortunate. We have so much more than that too. But that gratitude is a really important counterbalance to the negative internal dialogue, like Marty's saying. So I think Marty's work with Ubuntu, I think, is just so important on campus for our student population, for everybody, really. And I think it's a wonderful resource that you're creating, Marty, for our students here on campus.
Yeah, and it's a perfect alternative for those, I know especially for international students. From my background, going to see a counselor, there is a lot of stigma attached to that.
Yes,
so it provides
for sure.
a really more comfortable opportunity for them to, explore these things. Yeah. For those who do want to see a counselor but feel ashamed, it should be important to stress that there is absolutely no shame in going to see a counselor. I think it takes a great deal of strength and maturity and metacognitive awareness of themselves for you to actually realize, yes, I need to go see somebody. So if you do need to seek out those resources, please do. And they're strictly confidential as well.
Yes,
so
definitely.
100%.
It's really, really, really important to note.
And it's actually, it's a real strength to be able to say, okay, I'm struggling with something. I think maybe I need some assistance with this.
Yeah.
In whatever way, whether it's counseling or Ubuntu or going to a stress management workshop or whatever. Sure. That's a personal strength.
All right, so we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to open up the floor to any final comments. Is there one thing you want the students to take away from this discussion we've had today?
I would say, from my perspective, get aware of how it is that you talk to yourself. Just start observing, non-judgmentally, what is it that I say to myself? Am I kind? Am I good? Do I love myself? Do I treat myself that way? Or am I really hard on myself? And how does that impact me? When I'm feeling stressed out, or when I'm feeling anxious, or when I'm feeling down, what am I thinking about? Check in and look for patterns and the connection between how we think, the underlying beliefs that generate that, and how we feel, what our mood is like. And challenge the negative stuff. Hold it up to the light of day and say, wait a minute, is this real? Or am I making a whole bunch of negative, nasty assumptions that are scaring the heck out of me? Because when we do that, our brain picks it up as if we really are in trouble. There's a real threat. And it puts us into the emotional response as if there was a real threat, like fight or flight, stress, anxiety, fear. So it's not that nasty things don't happen, but the problem is when we exaggerate things into nasty things when they really aren't. And then we over-respond and end up with negative emotional responses that aren't necessary and are unrealistic. So get aware. Really look at what's going on in my thoughts, in my head, in my beliefs, and are they serving me well? Or is it time for a operating system upgrade, right?
I like that. What I would say, GB, two things very, very briefly. One is to adopt a concept of a loving God or a loving creator, however you define that. And there are lots of opportunities to do that in all of the major religions in the world. But to adopt a loving God, I remember years ago seeing a poster of a small child just 5 or 6 years old in abject poverty. But the statement underneath the poster was, God made me and God don't make junk. Right? And that's what I mean by a loving God, that we are created as loving, capable, good people. And loving self comes out of that perception of how we define ourselves and how we think God defines ourselves. So learning to love yourself, it is possible. To love yourself, sometimes we think is difficult, but each and every one of us can learn to love ourselves. And if that means a system upgrade, then so be it. But it is possible to learn that and to enjoy that. And from my perspective, Ubuntu helps us to do that. Ubuntu that is firmly recognized as a way of being in the world, but Ubuntu that is also, as you said earlier, GB, at the heart of so many of the world religions.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We think you've been really insightful and open about your thoughts, and I hope the listeners have gained a lot of insight on this topic. So I really want to thank you for being here with us again today. So we've learned a lot today, and I hope you've enjoyed the show. Take care, because OIA cares. Have a good day, everyone.